for that reason, right? Lori Olson. Lori is with Opportunity International and has worked for OI for 30 years. And Lori is one of Trinity's contacts, along with Sheila Ross, who has such a passion for Opportunity International. And we're so glad that you all can join us today.
Thank you.
Before we get to Mark's presentation, I just want to alert you to ask questions as they come up through Mark's talk using the chat feature. And then when Mark is finished, we'll do some Q&A time. Lori, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, just hello, everyone. Good morning.
So happy to have you. And this is really a great group representing OI. Just lovely people, and we're excited to continue our relationship with them. All right. So Mark has a great book called On Poverty. And I think that some of you have picked it up at Trinity. And I have read about half of it, and it is great. And so I really urge everyone to continue reading that book. And now we get to hear some of the stories that Mark has collected through his years of work and actually growing up in Africa. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Jerry. It's great to be with old friends and meet new ones this morning, even if it is just virtually. It's a gift for me to be a part of your church community, so thank you. And in return, I'd like to offer you a gift, one of hope. Hope that the world is finally changing for millions of people who, all created equal in God's image with immeasurable worth, have been trapped on a generational treadmill of extreme poverty and sheer survival. And my hope is this morning that your newfound hope will be actionable, and that you will choose to take part in our generation's defining accomplishment, which is, I believe, ending extreme poverty. We all know that some things appear permanent when they're really not. We think they'll never change. And then the stars just line up perfectly and the impossible becomes a reality. The Berlin Wall falls. A man walks on the moon. Electric cars drive themselves. And this morning, we're going to look at another impossibility by taking a journey with the poor during COVID-19. First, just a little about my own journey and the context. I grew up in South Africa under apartheid, where 25% of the population made all the rules, owned all the land. And virtually every member of that white minority felt that the situation was permanent and that it was just. I was indoctrinated from infancy by my all-white friends, my school teachers, later the media, and even my own pastor. And though my missionary parents had zero tolerance for racism, and they would bend every unjust law they could short of being deported, as missionaries, their focus was on eternity, what happens after death. And extreme poverty for the masses was accepted as the norm. That situation just seemed so permanent. Thankfully, apartheid has collapsed, and there's a growing revolution of people committed to eradicating extreme poverty during our lifetime. I know that sounds like a big, hairy, audacious goal, and it is. It feels so permanent, but today's poverty can be yesterday's Berlin Wall. This is not just my own wishful thinking. Prior to COVID-19, Bill and Melinda Gates wrote this bold statement: the lives of people in poor countries will improve faster in the next 15 years than at any other time in history, and their lives will improve more than anyone else's. And during my own lifetime, I have already witnessed tremendous progress in our war against poverty. 50 years ago, when Opportunity International started, and there were only 3.5 billion people in the world, half of them were living in extreme poverty, 1.7 billion people throughout Asia, Africa, Latin America, and parts of Eastern Europe. Well, today's world, there's twice that many people, 7.5 billion people, and yet there are fewer than 750 million people living on less than $2 a day. 1 billion people have been freed from extreme poverty. And for the first time in the world's history, that scourge grips less than 10% of humanity. That's tremendous progress. And thanks to folks like you, Opportunity has played a significant part in that narrative. But we've all been conditioned to think that extreme poverty is permanent, in part by focusing on how far we have yet to go, rather than how much has been accomplished in one generation. When I joined Opportunity 30 years ago, some 40,000 people were dying daily from hunger and related illness. Today, it's half that. Before we go to bed tonight, some 20,000 people will die from hunger. That's tremendous progress. But it's still 20,000 too many, because tomorrow another 20,000 people will die from hunger. And the next day, and the next. But the real tragedy is that for the vast majority of those people, there's no shortage of food. They simply don't have the money to buy the nutritious food that's readily available. And here's what that journey looks like in practical terms: to progress from surviving on less than $2 a day to living on about $5. In addition to cooking over a simple stove rather than open fire, this progress means riding a bicycle rather than being restricted by where you can go, by how far you can walk, often barefoot. And it means sleeping on a mattress instead of a mat on the floor. It also includes safe drinking water and a toilet rather than an open field. And it often sends children to school on a full stomach so they can really learn. And it almost always means a regular source of livelihood. During my frequent travels with Opportunity, I've witnessed these levels of poverty. And I'll try to help you appreciate the notable progression and the huge difference that just a few dollars can make. Rather than describe for you how some poor people live, watch as this short scene unfolds, one described in my book. You'll note how these squatters learn to creatively survive and conduct their businesses on a narrow strip of land because there is no other space available for these people. And while that shows the wretched housing and working conditions of the working poor, sadly, the world's poverty ladder has yet a lower rung, where the ultra poor scratch every day to survive on less than $2 or even $1 a day. I took this snapshot in India of a community in their little lean-tos on the only open land these families could find. Not on a railroad track, but the narrow median strip separating the traffic of a busy 4-lane highway. And seeing a mother raising her small children with vehicles whipping by on either side, it redefines for me the term survival. Well, having ascended several rungs of the poverty ladder from where that woman found herself, this man's old bicycle is not only his mode of transportation. As a delivery man, it's a steady source of income, enabling him to care for his family, who live in that thatched roof you see right behind him. And the good news is that for these people, they're not destined to stay down there. There is hope for them. Many of them are are working their way up and out of extreme poverty. The opening scene of my book on poverty takes place in India, with me on the back of the bicycle rickshaw that you see. And if you don't have a copy of my book, please ping Jill Cornell or me, and we'll gladly send you a complimentary copy. Well, when I was in India a dozen years ago, and I took these pictures, the streets were jammed with bicycles, thousands of them, like bees on a honeycomb. And then a couple of years back, when I returned, in some cities, I hardly saw a bicycle. Everyone was riding a motorcycle, going to work, shopping, creating capital, or taking their kids to school, like this family of 4 who somehow share one small scooter. And here's a short clip that shows what that progress looks like today. I took this standing on the corner where a decade ago, this would have been wall-to-wall bicycle. This too is tremendous progress. Granted, the air pollution is enough to make your eyes red and your throat burn. But if the last decade foreshadows the next, these carbon-producing motorbikes will be replaced with cars, many of them electric. So how do we move people from open fire cooking, like the woman on the highway, to simple stoves? Or from her floor mat to a mattress? And how do we help people move from bare feet to bicycles and then to motorbikes? And most importantly, how do we do it in a way that offers the poor an empowering hand up rather than a degrading handout? And it was answering that very question that launched Opportunity International 50 years ago, making micro enterprise loans to poor entrepreneurs. And today our focus is now on the extremely poor, those who are living on less than $2 a day. So in addition to our classic micro enterprise loan program, today our emphasis is on 2 specialized programs: education finance and agriculture finance. In all 3 of those loan programs, micro enterprises, education, and agriculture, we capture efficiencies and we reduce costs by harnessing technology on behalf of the poor, many of whom own or have easy access to cell phones all over the world. And loan disbursements and payments are transferred from their electronic wallets. Training and coaching is done virtually, in many cases with voice-activated interaction. Even crops are inspected and pesticides recommended remotely with the use of a smartphone. As a result of this 3-pronged strategy, in 2019, more people were reached with better services than at any other time. That year, we loaned out $3 billion, fueling over 7 million family businesses. And with that, 13 million families now have savings accounts with us. We have a lot to celebrate. For those living in extreme poverty, 2019 was a banner year. But then came COVID-19. And for us in the US, this is a health crisis. But for those living in extreme poverty, COVID-19 is an economic tsunami. At today's rate, far more will die from starvation than from the virus. During the past year alone, some 100 million people have been thrown back into extreme poverty, with projections that as many as 200 million new people will be scratching out an existence on less than $2 a day, wiping out 30 years of economic progress. And the simple reason for this? The world's bottom billion conduct their businesses on the street. Most have never entered an air-conditioned shopping mall or a grocery store let alone conducted business online. They trade in open markets or from their homes, selling and buying from each other or bartering goods for services. So when their government restricts their movement and severely punishes them, sometimes brutally, for breaking the lockdown, these people cannot work. They can't sell their wares. They can't buy vegetables from their neighbor. Schools are closed and farmers can't get their produce to market. And once you spiral down into this level of survival, if you don't work, you don't eat. It really is that simple. So it's because of this reality that Opportunity International has pivoted. And we have, for 50 years, provided only loans and savings. And now we are responding to the poor in a different way. For the first time, we are, in addition to all of that, we're offering our loan clients some emergency services at no charge. Since all three programs have been severely impacted by COVID, we responded to each one in a different way. And thanks to friends like you, $2.5 million have been donated for our unanticipated costs in these three programs. First, most of our microenterprise loans have been indefinitely extended, allowing our clients to direct their weekly loan payments to food and other family necessities. And for those who can appropriately take on further debt, Opportunity has provided our banks with additional collateral or equity so that our financial institutions can afford to take on the extra risk of loaning at this time. One of these enterprise loan recipients is Diana, a laundry detergent maker in Ghana. And during the partial lockdown, her raw materials became unavailable and she was forced to close her detergent business. But this entrepreneur soon spotted a new opportunity, one created by the virus. And with guidance from a chemist at a nearby university, she created her own brand of hand sanitizer. That, plus our small loan, put Diana right back in business, so successful that she plans to continue making and selling this product after the crisis has passed. Secondly, through our education finance program, Opportunity currently has loans out to 14,000 school proprietors, people who provide a quality yet affordable alternative to the government schools that frequently fail to educate their students. These loans that we make build classrooms, they hire teachers, cook lunches, purchase books. But due to COVID-19, virtually every one of those 14,000 schools has closed down, leaving their teachers with no income and some 3.5 million children either at home or on the street, missing out not only on their education, but also on their one daily nutritious meal at school. Unable to collect school fees, the school proprietors are naturally unable to repay their loans to us. And so not only are we now extending their loans, in many cases, we're covering part of their teachers' salaries so that when the government does allow the schools to reopen, they can immediately return to the classroom. At one of those schools in Uganda, their head teacher, Jude, joined Opportunity's WhatsApp group of educators, where our COVID training updates help, and they creatively weather this crisis. And as a result, Jude brought teachers and parents from the school together to establish a large vegetable garden on the school grounds. And they set up a market stall, and with the earnings from the produce, they now further subsidize the salaries of those teachers. And similar to Diana, Jude saw an economic lining to the COVID cloud, and together with the other teachers, they bought hand sanitizer in bulk and are repackaging it in small amounts for resale in the local market. I hope my grandsons get a Jude as their teacher when the schools reopen this fall. The final program in Opportunity's attack on extreme poverty is agriculture finance. While many urban centers have become saturated with microfinance loans, Opportunity has opted to focus our resources on the rural, higher risk communities serving poor farmers who have as little as a couple acres of land. And we walk alongside the farmers throughout the process. On the front end, we provide loans and they can then buy improved seed or fertilizer, which raises the productivity from their land. We then continue with extensive farm training throughout the growing season. And finally, we deliver buyers at the back end to increase the prices and their profits. But COVID threw a wrench in the works when governments enforced social distancing and fined those caught traveling to buy supplies or sell their produce. And the farmers were left with no way to feed their families and certainly no way to repay our loans. And so Opportunity again did what we're known for, and that is to innovate on behalf of the poor. Along with many other groups, we brought together this co-op of farmers that you see standing there with their combined harvest. And by aggregating their crops, these peasant farmers earned about 40% more than if they had each sold theirs separately in the local market. We then secured permission from the government of Malawi to hire large trucks that would drive from the city to these remote villages where our farmers live and work. And this low-cost intervention resulted in multiple benefits. Farmers receive more profit by selling in bulk. Grocers restock empty shelves. Truck drivers secure new routes and jobs, and hungry families buy their daily food. Well, it's stories like these with a huge social impact that energize me to keep going. And with your partnership, these hardworking micro-entrepreneurs, farmers, and educators all receive hope. Hope that they will survive today, and assurance that they will thrive again tomorrow. With COVID-19, it may take us a little longer to cross the finish line, but today's poverty can be yesterday's Berlin Wall. So on behalf of Diana, Jude, and farmers across Africa, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Those are really impactful stories. And it strikes me as I look at the pictures, that I don't see these people defining themselves by their way of life. That perhaps they are more than the experience of poverty. Do you see that?
These people are, though monetarily poor, they are rich in areas where I am bankrupt. And they have so much to teach me about life. That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, I love it for that reason. And one thing you say in the book in the justice chapter is that you have become convinced that the majority of the world's poorest people are poor not through no fault of their own. Extreme poverty is not caused by laziness, but by latitude and longitude.
Right. Yeah, they're poor because of where they were born. I mean, here I am, born in the richest country on earth, and in the chapter you're describing, Justice, Esther is born in Zimbabwe, where life expectancy at that time was 34 years old due to AIDS. And she didn't choose that. I didn't choose this. And I don't have to be guilty for where I was born. I had no choice in where I was born. But when I understand the richness that they have, I can become a just member of our global village.
And the story of Esther is particularly touching, I think, because Esther had how many children?
She's 3.
Right. And she also had AIDS,
She
and
had
her
AIDS,
husband had died.
had died of AIDS, right?
And
Yeah,
and
and
what
she,
did she do? Yeah.
yeah, well, she knew that that AIDS was going to take her, and that she would die. And at our weekly trust group meetings, we oftentimes bring in health workers who then give real basic practical training on how to live with AIDS. And virtually every member of Esther's group was HIV positive. There were no men in her village anymore, only boys and really the elderly. All the working age men had either died of AIDS or had left to find work in the cities. And so she knew that she was what was going to affect her. And so she wanted her 3 children to become capable of running the farm once she died. And she didn't know how long she had. I think the oldest at the time, if I remember, was 7. And she was hoping if she could last 5 years, that child could raise the other 2 and care for the farm.
And she was so ingenious, and I think that's typical of the kind of people that are in extreme poverty. Is, she was really thinking about, okay, if I could borrow money to buy a sewing machine, I could teach my daughters to sew, and they could make the uniforms. And we saw the uniforms of the kids in your presentation, and because she looked at it and said, these uniforms are going to go on. They're going to need uniforms. So she had that kind of, I think, really strategic look at it.
Right.
And then she wanted to get water to her house. I mean, these are
Right.
the kind of things that that you're raising money for in order to make small loans, especially
Yeah.
in terms of, our monetary
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, that pump, I remember her talking about it. That pump and the hose that would carry the water to her garden cost $400. That's all she needed. Because in her case, what this paradox that she was facing was the training that she received from the healthcare worker was that in order to extend your life, if you want to extend your life so that your kids can become old enough to care for themselves, you have got to conserve your energy. You cannot be extending yourself physically. And yet this woman, for the first 3 or 4 hours every day, is trudging up and down that hill carrying water to her vegetable garden. And she had this, conundrum. How do I deal with that and extend my life? And so she wanted to borrow money to buy this pump. It's just a foot-operated pump that she can, and many people had them in the valley there, so she knew it would work. But, yeah.
And so the groups that you're talking about and that we have talked about a little bit with OI are, you get a group of, in many cases, I guess these are women together.
Primarily.
Yep. And they have an idea such as Esther's, and they would like to obtain a loan. And so they, if they're able to obtain the loan, then they make payments on it. So in the group, if someone can't make their loan, the others will help them. Is that right?
Right. And the peer pressure is so strong for that, because there is this very firm policy that nobody gets the next loan if any one member of the group is defaulted. And so the women have this huge peer pressure to help each other out. So if one of the women's child is sick and she has to stay home and can't sell her widget, whatever it might be, so she makes no money that week and she can't make her $2 payment, the other women will chip in and make good, because they know sooner or later they're going to have that same predicament. And if one of the women's corrupt and is really trying to abscond with the money, then the women won't let her stay in the group, because after every 6 months they are eligible for the next larger loan to each expand their little enterprise.
And so this is what we're giving, Trinity's Lenten offering project is Our goal is 10,000. We're at 7880 right now. So we're about
Wonderful.
2,100 away. We're not far. And that
Wonderful.
it's for this kind of thing.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah, these trust groups, they're all over the world, and that's their only access to credit. The banks won't lend. I mean, the level of poverty we're talking about now, nobody would lend them money in a bank, and so we give them the loan. And so you're creating a trust group like these, and each member in the group gets a loan, and then they can start saving their money, which they do. Amazing that these desperately poor people will make a deposit of 50 cents and keep growing their assets.
And keep coming up with new ideas that might seem pretty basic, but they could certainly have their own Shark Tank show.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned in your book the things that you learned just about being in community. And I thought one of them was really touching, and it was about you when your brother died. And you will tell this much better yourself, obviously. But when your brother died, you know, no one in your community knew.
Yeah, I was gone for the funeral. Gone for 4 or 5 days. Nobody knew it. Nobody knew I had a brother, let alone that he had died. And my brother, who had spent the last 20 years in the Mideast, living in a very poor community, he and his wife had gone over there as tent makers, and they had chosen to send their kids to public schools, learn Arabic, and they didn't always have water. And they were desperately, well, my brother wasn't desperately poor, but not like the ones we were just talking about earlier, but the whole community was impoverished. And so for the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, people would come in from all over and just share their, condolences. And she had a little guest book that people would sign. Over 400 people stopped by. To some of them strangers, most of them Muslims, undeterred by her faith. And yet here I was, in contrast, bankrupt at home, alone, and my younger brother had just died of cancer. So what a contrast. It was just such an epiphany to me of how different the rich and the poor. I mean, we build fences around our homes to protect our belongings and to protect our privacy. And we think that we now have freedom because we don't have to depend on anybody else. And yet the poor are rich because they have learned the beauty of sharing resources, trading, bartering a good for a service, and making good on somebody else's payment at their loan, at their trust group. That's the way they live. That's richness compared to my, Chapter 11 community in my suburb.
Yeah, and I know so many people who are on this call right now know that lesson, that when you do visit countries like this, you're just blown away by them, and you learn so much more than you give. And Julie Morrison just said she loves the quote, "They are rich in areas where I am bankrupt."
So true. So thank you, Julie. It is so true. And the more you get to know these folks, and I've just had the privilege over the 30 years of being in so many homes, you just see their richness. Doesn't take away from the fact that they're scratching every day to figure out how they're going to feed their kids. But and one of the beauties of a loan program like this, rather than giving out charity, is that with that loan and that repayment, they not only receive economic richness, they receive dignity. They receive respect. I didn't take anything from you, rich white man. I worked for it. And they are proud of what they have done. And it is just very, very humbling to be with them in their homes and in their little enterprises.
Well, we have an opportunity to do a virtual trip to Columbia on March 25th from 7 to 8. And that virtual trip is an opportunity to take a look at that. Do you want to tell us about it a little bit, Lori?
You want to come off mute, Lori?
Sorry. Yes, we're going to take you on a journey to the streets of Cartagena, Colombia, which is the community that you guys are personally supporting. We're going to visit clients in their homes. We're going to visit schools, and our program director, Brian Olarte, who we heard a couple weeks ago, will be with us on that journey with another church partner of ours, Christ Presbyterian Church, that has been a partner now with Opportunity for about 30 years. So it'll be fun to take the two faith communities and come together for that very important night.
Great. And that you'll hear more about that through Trinity's communication. And you know what? You can just always call Jill Cornell. She'll take your calls day and night, whatever it takes. Right, Jill? Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions, housekeeping to the group? Well, this has been such a privilege, really, Mark, to have you share your stories and those photos. You're just really incredible.
Thank you.
And we are lucky to have you here this morning.
We are all blessed to be here. I mean, let's face it, being born in the US, we hit life's jackpot. And that's why your chapter that you've selected, I'm glad you selected the one on justice, is how do we wrestle with that reality that we were born in this place, and this place of abundance. It's not a reason for feeling guilty. It's a reason for saying, okay, God, what is it that you want me to do, and how can I be a part of our global village? Because God, I think clearly in the scriptures has said that if we want to show our love for him, in the last chapter of Matthew, if we want to show our love for Jesus, we show our love to the poor, those who are sick, those who are marginalized, those who are in prison. And so how do we do that in today's world in a way that gives them dignity and hope? We have the privilege of doing, but that's the question of justice. What do I give it all away? I don't think that's what we're asked to do, but what are we asked to do? And then I think especially during Lent, it's a wonderful time to reflect and say, right, God, everything I have is a gift from you. Every breath I take, every dollar I own is yours. It is a gift from you. How am I to steward that on behalf of the poor who you've asked me to love? That's why I'm just privileged to be here this morning, because to be a voice for the poor, I mean, they are the proxy for Jesus. And whenever we do anything for them, we are loving Jesus. It's an act of worship. So for each of you to even be on the call today, it's an act of worship and giving back to the one who said, if you love me, take care of the least of these. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lori and Sheila. And I'll close with what Melanie DeLuca said, which is, thank you, Mark. Your message is so powerful and needed. And I think so needed in our culture where we focus so much on ourselves and, what we need instead of what others need. And we do have copies of the book on poverty at Trinity, and just, give us a call or drop by and pick one up. So thank you, and see you March 25th.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Happy Sunday.
No. Thank you.